Blog Talk Radio.
Greetings, everyone. This is the Sound Health Option Show with Richard Talk to Me Guy, and Sherry Edwards is away at a conference. So today we're going to be talking, or I'm going to be talking with Jill Cicciarelli, the author of Fermented, a really great book that gives you wonderful information about not only the what I would call the tech part of making fermented foods, like what is kombucha, what's a SCOBY, how do you do this, what's that, what's the preparation, all of that, the fact that you really can do it on a small table in your kitchen, you don't have to knock out a wing to have, bubbling jars happening. And along with the tech of it, really very clear and easy to follow recipes with great photographs of what the product will look like, and the possible applications, because we're not just talking about kombucha, we're talking about everything from sauerkraut to recipes that have more what I would call history to them from other cultures, something called kvass, which is kind of a spicy, I would say Slavic country drink that you would use, and everything in here is about fermentation, so that gives you the foundation of having probiotics in the foods you consume on a daily basis. So it's a very one of my more recent favorite cookbooks. So let me get this show started. I don't have any other announcements. I could I'm certain grouse about fracking or the possible boondoggle that's happening in California with the Proposition 1, but I think we talked about that enough next week. So I'll introduce Jill. Your health is your most important asset. Eating well is something you can do every single day to protect yourself and your most important commodity. Adding fermented foods to your daily diet is an essential piece of the clean eating puzzle, and you can do it easily in any kitchen with nearly any food. Jill Cicciarelli is the author of Fermented, a four-season approach to paleo probiotic foods, and the founder of health blog First Comes Health. She graduated from the Institute for Integrative Nutrition as a holistic health coach and is certified by the American Association for Drugless Practitioners. Jill lives in Pennsylvania with her husband and a cat named Quincy. And this is a great interview. I'm really excited about this. All right, if you have any questions, just type them into chat. And I'll remind everybody right before I do that we can find these replays on the Sound Health Option Show about a half hour after the show, and or on iTunes by searching for Sherry Edwards, or in my favorite app that plays on everything called Stitcher. Just download Stitcher and you can search for it there. All right, here we go.
I'm going to open this by using the phrase, "it works for me." And the reason that I want to do that with Jill is because I think that's really a foundational thing that I know it's a foundational thought in my thinking as a practitioner and a bunch of stuff. And I think that's really true of this too, and I think you found this in your own work as a private practitioner, and in what I've read is that fermentation is an amazing thing. I mean, I think it's magical in many ways. And yet there are some people who are just either not physically comfortable with it, or they have a reaction to it, like we think fermentation is a cure-all. And I just really want to keep that as a foundational thought. It works for me. And I think that's true of in all things that we consume or we try to do, is not everything works for everybody. And I'm not saying there's anything bad about fermentation. I think fermentation is magic.
Well, I completely agree with what you're saying, and that is true. The phrase "it works for me," the sentence "it works for me" is true with what you're saying. Fermentation is for some people and it's not for others, but it's also true whenever you actually start to ferment. I mean, in the practice of fermentation, there's a lot of that mentality. It works for me. What you like is what works.
And it's about, compliance. If you like fermentation, I mean, if you like fermented foods, like I know that I love classics like kimchi and other, a lot of the Korean restaurants and fooditoriums make, make a lot of great fermented products. And we don't even think about things like creme fraiche as being a lightly fermented product. And of course, we all know about yogurt.
Right.
But you don't hear yogurt and think, oh, you don't hear fermentation in yogurt. It's
right.
Yogurt. Yogurt's like friendly to everybody.
Yes, very accessible.
Very accessible. So I want to back up, and I want to give you a compliment and ask you a question all at the same time. I'm going to ask you, are you a writer by nature? And I'm asking that because one of the things I loved about your book, I can't exactly call it a cookbook, even though it has wonderful recipes and instructions and really great how-to. I really feel like I could hand anybody this book who is interested and say, look at this. Just read the beginning and kind of get comfortable with it. Are you a writer by nature? Because one of the things I really like about this is these wonderful little, quips or, your opening commentary about, when you're talking about kvass, I think it's called, or, any of these are shrubs. You give a little bit of a sort of an allegory about, the history or the lore of the thing, and then you fill out the rest of the page with a wonderful recipe and great picture.
I do very much enjoy the process of writing. It has always been in jobs that I've had previous to opening my own practice. It has always been an element in these different positions that I've held. So I've done it a lot, and I very much enjoy it. And when I got the opportunity to write a book, it was, almost like feasting on one of my favorite foods, because it's something I really get a lot out of personally and emotionally, so it was a real treat to do it. But thank you for enjoying my writing style. I have a hard time putting the label of writer on myself, but yeah, I really do enjoy doing that.
And it really shows. I mean, it's really one of the things that I think that's a great lead-in for, as I say, for people who don't know much about fermentation or haven't done it before. I think it's one of the comforting elements of, here's kind of a story that gives a background as to where this came from, or why this is an enjoyable thing to have, or, the thing called shrubs, which I love because I admit, my hand is raised, I love a good cocktail. And I think shrubs is I think shrubs are just so cool. But we'll get to those. I want to ask, what was your journey into getting into fermentation, and then B, how did you get possessed enough about fermentation to want to write a book about it?
Well, my journey into fermentation started before I even knew about fermentation proper. I mean, I've always been interested in old foodways and tradition and ways that people would nourish themselves and their families in years past. So it's not necessarily like today where there's a lot of convenience foods and there's a lot of shortcuts in the kitchen, which some are really good and some aren't. But I've always been interested in food preparation the hard way. And through my exploration with that, obviously fermentation is one of the big boys when it comes to doing food preparation the traditional way. So I was introduced to the concept of it in that regard. How I got introduced to fermentation in my own kitchen was a friend of mine, Liz, said to me, hey, you ought to start making your own kombucha. It's so great. And I knew what kombucha was, and I knew that I liked it, and I also knew that it was really expensive to buy those little $5 miniature bottles at the grocery store. But I thought, I don't have all this fancy equipment, and I don't have the space, and I don't have the time. And she said, you don't need fancy equipment. You don't need a ton of space. You don't need a lot of time. to devote to it, you just need to have a jar and put it on your counter and let it go. And I took her advice, and that's how I started fermenting at home. I started with kombucha. And once I realized how easy it was, how tasty it was, how in control of, what I was eating I could be, and how inexpensive it was, I thought, why am I not doing this with other things? So I really started to experiment with other types of ferments at that point. I wrote a series about how to make kombucha on my website, and that precipitated a lot of dialogue from the public, which I was really grateful for, and friends of mine who had written a book introduced me to their publisher in hopes that I would want to write a book about fermentation, or rather about kombucha. And the idea just blossomed into a larger work about many different types of fermentation, not just kombucha. So that's how that came about.
And were you when you first started making kombucha, were you a recreational consumer, or were you drinking it because you thought it had health benefits for your gut biome and your overall immune system?
Initially, I was a recreational consumer. It kind of became a trendy thing, like let's go have a kombucha, and I got some kombucha and it has chia seeds in it, and it was just kind of a thing that people talked about, and I thought, I'm just going to give this a shot, and I thought it was tasty, and it was fruity, and it was fizzy, and it tasted good. And then I started to notice some really great things as a result of regularly including it into my diet. My skin cleared up, my digestion was a lot better, I just felt much better overall. I just had more energy, and I thought there might be something to this. And that's when I really started to explore what some of the health benefits are. I mean, it's certainly not a cure-all, but I found that when I started to introduce it into my diet regularly, things really changed for me for the positive. So I became a convert after that.
Yes. And when you started making, I'm going to jump ever so slightly from, I can't remember that, in herbally, I have a degree as a master herbalist. And so when I think about herbs, I think about the term wildcrafted. And I know that in the fermentation world, there is you buy a packet of a starter in a store theory, I don't know what that's called, and or the other theory of you expose it to the air, and the natural pathogens in the air that are appropriate come and help with the fermentation process.
Yes. So are you asking which one do I do? Which one do I use?
Yeah, I'm asking you which one do you do? Do you have a preference for one or the other? And then I have some follow-up thoughts to that.
Okay. For me, it depends on the type of ferment that I'm doing. So, for instance, if I'm shredding up a bunch of carrots and I want to make fermented shredded up carrots, then I'm using wild fermentation for that. I'm adding a little salt to it, I'm creating a brine with that, and I'm letting, like you said, the natural bacteria that's in the air or on the carrots or on my hands just take hold at that point. With something like yogurt, with kombucha, with a couple of other, with water, kefir, with milk kefir, I need to use bacterial starters to get them going. A lot of folks feel funny about wild fermentation, about just letting whatever's in the air take hold and ferment. But I think it's a wonderful way to culture the good bacteria that's around us. Other types of ferments, like the ones I mentioned, are very difficult to start with nothing. You need something to start it. So that is commonly referred to as controlled fermentation, so using a starter to get something going. So, it depends on the type of ferment, what I will do.
And my follow-up thought about what I was thinking is that I suspect that the idea of doing some wild fermentation, to me, makes sense that it would actually help the immune system because you are taking in certain pathogens that are airborne in your surrounding environs. Mm-hmm. And so therefore that would help. There's a theory in the herbal world, I can't remember the name of the herbalist right now, where he goes around to people's homes and he looks what's growing in their yard. And he says there's oftentimes a correlation between what's growing in their yard and the herbs that their body relates to. And I think the same thing is about airborne pathogens. I know there's spooky pathogens out there. I
Definitely.
understand that. However, I also believe that you could help build your immune relationship to your surrounding environs by having some wild ferments in your life.
That's true. That's very true.
And I understand. So now, can you make kombucha? Let's go to sort of the standard, the gateway drug to fermentation, kombucha, because it just amazes me. I like kombucha a lot. I'm not a regular consumer because I'm just not. Mm-hmm. I'm not so much of a carb person. But I like the flavor a lot. And I know people that regularly are paying $4 and $5. I mean, I can go to our local silly expensive grocery store, and there's a whole section of the kombucha now. And I remember kombucha when it was like, see that weird jar on top of my fridge? That's kombucha. It was like, ooh. And now there's whole shelves in grocery stores. You go to a Whole Foods, and there's like a whole section of kombucha. It's like madness. It's amazing.
Trendy. Yeah.
It's very trendy. But it amazes me how much people are happily paying for a bottle of kombucha.
I know. It's terrible.
Like, really? Are you kidding? So please, talk to us about making kombucha.
Well, it's so inexpensive to do on your own.
Yeah. So how do we start by, how do we make kombucha?
Well, the backbone to kombucha making, you do need a bacterial and yeast starter for it, and it's commonly called a SCOBY. And SCOBY stands for Symbiotic Colony of Bacteria and Yeast. And a SCOBY looks like a little gelatinous, opaque, whitish, sometimes it's tan, hockey puck, or dinner plates, depending on the size of it. And it's rubbery, you can wiggle it, and it's wet and slippery.
Can be kind of spooky looking. I gotta add, it can be a little. It looks like it could be in a Stephen King or a Steven Spielberg movie, and it might talk.
Yeah, some people are kind of turned off by the look of a SCOBY, but it's a little living colony of organisms that will do the fermentation work for you. And so that is something that if anybody wants to make kombucha, that is something that is required for kombucha making. So where to get one of these things? I tell people all the time, you can get one from a friend. Sometimes on Craigslist they'll sell them. If you belong to a food co-op, they often have bulletin boards where people will say, I have an excess of SCOBYs or SCOBY wanted, and you can find someone that way. Or you can grow your own, starting with a little bit of kombucha that you either bought in the store or got from somebody, and a little bit of sweetened tea, room temperature sweetened tea, and then you can grow your own SCOBY from there. But once you have a SCOBY and a little bit of the liquid that the SCOBY grows in, it's simply a matter of brewing an amount of tea, and it's important to choose the right kind of tea. Black tea, green tea, oolong tea, rooibos tea, these will all work very well for making kombucha. Brewing an amount of tea, sweetening it with sugar of some kind. I do not recommend doing it with honey at this point because that can work against the fermentation process. So just sweetening it with sugar of some type, letting it come to room temperature, and then adding the SCOBY and the little bit of liquid that the SCOBY has grown in, adding that to a glass container, covering it loosely with a cloth or a coffee filter, and just waiting. And the bacteria and the yeast will feed off of the sugar that you added to the tea, and it will ferment it and turn it into kombucha.
I'm laughing because it blows my mind at how simple it is, and yet people are paying $5 a bottle for this.
I know. It's so inexpensive. If you get a couple of tea bags, a little bit of sugar. Once you get a SCOBY or grow one of your own, it's just a few cents for a bottle when it comes down to it. So, I guess they're paying for convenience, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I have been known to buy prefab coffee in a store. Not very often, but it happens sometimes when you're out. You want. And so what are some of the benefits we could notice from consuming, as I say, just the gateway of just starting with kombucha? What did you notice?
Well, I noticed, like I said, my skin really got cleared. I had, a little bit of problem skin, and that seemed to clear up. My mood was elevated a little bit. I felt really good. I didn't feel as tired or down. I live in the Northeast United States. We have gray days around here certain times of year, and it can get kind of depressing and bum you out. So that was a nice way to, keep my mood elevated and keep it positive during those gray months. I had a lot of energy. I slept really well. So, yeah, I always tell people be very cautious of wild health claims that people make about kombucha. There's very little science that backs up these wild claims that it cures cancer or cures balding or whatever. But like you said, the tone for the show is if it works for you. So if you drink it and you feel good and your skin clears up or you feel like you have a little bit more pep in your step, then keep doing it. So that's what I noticed. I just felt overall much better. My skin was a lot better. Slept really well. My digestion was really good. So I really invite people to give it a shot, not even just kombucha, but other types of ferments, and see, what kind of changes that introducing those foods can incite.
Does the process of making the kombucha with the SCOBY, does that do anything to the caffeine in the teas?
It doesn't.
If you use like a straight-up black tea?
Yeah, if you use black tea or green tea or caffeinated tea, it'll still be there once it's fermented. So you can make kombucha with tea that's been decaffeinated. If you want to try a different type of tea, rooibos tea, which is not technically made from the tea plant, it's made from another type of plant. It's often called red tea. It is naturally decaffeinated, and it makes a very nice kombucha. So that's also an alternative.
Well, and also rooibos by itself has some wonderful tonic properties, long-term beneficial effect. So I like the idea. I'm not opposed to black tea, but I just like the idea of the rooibos because it's such a great adaptogen. It's so beneficial. Adaptogens are long-term beneficial effect, typically, and they strive for homeostasis. So they're balancing the system. So I think rooibos, after we hang up, I'm making rooibos kombucha. And I haven't even made kombucha yet, but I will.
Oh, good.
And I want to clarify something about the sugar, because I think that there are products out there that add sugar after the ferment because people want it to be sweet. What's the function of the sugar in the process of actually making making kombucha? What is the function of the sugar?
The sugar is what fuels the bacteria and yeast that your SCOBY is made from. That they are the ones who are consuming the sugar and multiplying and dividing and giving off their gaseous waste and fermenting the tea. So they need it for food to survive. People do add sugar. Let me back up and say, after you've fermented your tea and it's kombucha and it's sitting in your jar on your countertop, it is not fizzy or fruity at this point naturally, of course. What a lot of people do, and myself included, is that I will bottle it in flip-top bottles so I can keep it airtight, and I add a little bit of sugar of some kind, whether it's just sugar from my sugar bowl or fruit juice or something like that, and then I seal it up and let it ferment a little longer and also keeping it airtight. That's what makes it fizzy. That's what gives it a little bit of sweetness, and that's what can give it a little bit of flavor. That is certainly not a required thing to do if someone wants to drink kombucha and is worried about sugar intake. If you just want to drink it right from the jar, it's perfectly good. It'll taste really great. It just won't be fizzy, and it won't have that added sweetness. But if somebody wants to put it through a second ferment with fruit or a little bit of additional sugar or honey at this time, That's what will make it a little bit fizzy. And a lot of people use kombucha as a replacement for pop in their diet. So if they're cutting out, Coke and Pepsi and whatever, and they still want something fizzy, that's why they often will go to kombucha. So sweetening it a little bit or adding fruit sometimes makes it more attractive.
So you could even add something like, this is an obscure one, pomegranate molasses.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which is a delicious, I use it in some Middle Eastern cooking. And I was turned on to it actually by Polly Halstead, who wrote Primal Cuisine. And it's a wonderful thing to have around. It's a sharp flavor, but adds a wonderful sort of mystery flavor to many dishes. So I think it would be a really great thing. It's in my profile of flavors that I really like. So I think it would be a delicious thing to add to the kombucha to take it that direction. So you could really flavor the kombucha any direction you want. It could be a vegetable, juice, or any kind of concentrate of the juice, you could take it in a number of directions.
That's right. I mean, in my book Fermented, I give a lot of different options for flavoring it. Some are very standard, and some are kind of unusual. And, yeah, you're only limited by your own imagination. Whatever you like will work.
Wonderful. I love the idea of that, the kombucha. I hadn't thought of it that way until you just explained it, that the kombucha really is sort of a raw product when it's first made, and then you can flavor it according to whatever direction you want. I think that's really great. Another reason for, why are you paying $5 a bottle? But
right.
I'll get off that soon. So now let's talk about, from kombucha, let's move to, I want to go a slightly different direction and talk about making something like sauerkraut, which is more of a salt-based sweating, I believe more possibly of a wild ferment, or can be a wild ferment type product.
Right.
Talk about sauerkrauting.
Sauerkraut, I think, I happen to get into fermentation via kombucha, but I think sauerkraut is the way that many more people out there have gotten into fermentation or will get into fermentation. It is so much easier to do than kombucha making, which is very easy. But sauerkraut making is almost foolproof. I mean, it requires absolutely nothing that people don't already have in their kitchen. A cabbage, knife and a cutting board, a little bit of salt, and a jar. That's all one needs in order to make sauerkraut. The procedure of it is simply cut the cabbage in thin shards. I will often use a mandolin to make my pieces of cabbage very uniform. I try not to use a food processor because sometimes those blades on there can really make the shards very thin and small. And whenever you ferment anything, the texture of the food happens to change a little bit. So I think most people have had sauerkraut, and most people have had, in one form or another, raw cabbage. So think about the difference in the texture between the two. If the shards of cabbage initially are very thin, they have a chance, or they have the tendency, rather, to break down and get kind of mealy. So I try to keep them not thick, but not as thin or as even transparent as a food processor blade can make them. So I just cut mine on a mandolin or just use it by hand using a knife and a cutting board. Put the cabbage into a bowl. Put about, if I have, like a whole head of cabbage, I do about a tablespoon or a tablespoon and a half, sometimes 2 tablespoons of salt in there, and I just massage the salt right into the cabbage. And I will let it sit for a little while, and then I'll come back to it and I'll massage some more. And you'll notice that almost immediately the water that's in the cabbage will start to come out and create this salty brine in the bottom of the bowl. And that's very good. You want that. Once the cabbage is very limp and loose and you have quite a bit of brine coming out of it and in the bottom of your bowl, then you pack that cabbage very tightly into a glass container, ensuring that the brine that you've created using the salt comes up above the very firmly packed cabbage that you have in the jar. you want the brine line to be about an inch or so above the cabbage in there, because fermentation is what's called an anaerobic procedure, meaning it happens in an environment that has no oxygen. So you want to make sure that there's no air in there, in that jar, and to have the brine above it will ensure that. And then you simply loosely cover it with, I'm a big fan of a coffee filter secured with a rubber band. It's very easy, it's very inexpensive. Just simply secure that, leave it out, and after a time, you taste test it and you see, do I like this flavor? Do I like this texture? Is it starting to smell a little bit like sauerkraut? If it's not quite fermented to your liking, if it feels like, if this still feels and tastes a little raw, let it ferment for a little while longer. Depending on the ambient temperature in your home, it can take a week, or it can take 3 weeks, or it can take a month, or it can take 5 days. It just really depends on what's going on in your home, the amount of time that it'll take. But I always tell folks, just do a little taste test and taste a couple of little leaves out of your sauerkraut and see what it, if you like it, it's done, and if you don't like it, let it go for a little while longer. So it's as simple as that.
And then once it comes to the texture you like, then you just jar it up in, again, probably those handy rubber-rimmed jars and put it in the fridge and consume to your heart's content.
That's right. That's right. When in general, not just with sauerkraut, but when something has fermented to a point where you're satisfied with it, where it tastes good to you, you cover it with the the jar's lid, whatever the kind of lid that your jar came with, and put it in the refrigerator. Being in cold temperatures like what's in our refrigerators does not stop fermentation, but it turns it down almost to a stop. It makes it go very, very, very slowly. So if you leave something in your refrigerator for months at a time, if you have a little jar of sauerkraut and you put it in the refrigerator and you forget about it for 2 or 3 months, the flavors will have still evolved very slightly over that course of time, but nothing like it would have if it was out on your countertop. At that point, it would have, just fermented beyond recognition and wouldn't be good anymore. But the keeping it in your refrigerator almost halts it at that point where you decide that you like it and it tastes good to you.
So that means that a while ago I started experimenting. I saw somebody at an event, and he was using, I forget what he called it, but it was basically a fermented serrano chili. Basically the serrano chilies are a little bit of cabbage and salt that he ground up and fermented, and then was actually selling at a show. And I had bought a bottle because it was like magically handy to have to make salsa in 2 minutes. If you had, during this time of, we're coming to the end, but tomatoes by the, oh my God, trunkful.
By the trunkful,
but the idea of taking, a big giant heirloom tomato and a clove of garlic and smashing it up and throwing in a tablespoon of this, and boom, you had salsa. Or anything. Yeah. I like spicy food, and I like the vitality of chilies. They're so filled with chlorophyll and vitality and zesty goodness. So that I took that a couple of times and remade it myself using the starter principle, or what you're talking about, where I would use some of that and remake it. And right. I'd stopped for a while now, so it's been in the fridge for a month. It's just kind of sleeping. Is that right?
That's right. It's in essence just almost completely dormant in there. I mean, not quite completely, but pretty close.
And if I get to a point with something that is fermented that I find mold on the top, do I just scrape the mold off and it's good, or I should be tossing it out?
Yes, you can scrape the mold off. Typically, like if you're making sauerkraut or if you've shredded up carrots or something like that, and it's below the brine line, the mold will form on the surface of the brine. Definitely just scoop that off. If there's any type of your vegetable then exposed to the air, you can just top it a little bit with some fresh water or some salt water that you've mixed up in a small bowl. But yeah, mold on the surface of your vegetable ferments is not is not an emergency. It doesn't mean it's gone bad. It's just something that you can scrape off and keep going. However, I will say mold on your kombucha is a game stopper. That means you cannot use it anymore. So it's important to be aware of that.
And where would the mold come from? I mean, would it be something in your process that you've done incorrectly that you got mold, or it just happens from time to time?
It just happens. I mean, there's all kinds of molds, spores, and bacteria and whatever flying around in the air all around us. And when they find an environment that's slightly hospitable, they're going to grow there. So the people who ferment day in and day out for a living, and they are making their livelihood out of it, even they can't prevent 100% of the time mold from growing. So it's not something that anybody has ever done wrong. That's just something that happens whenever you ferment food.
There's stuff in the air. We're breathing it. I mean, yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
It happens. Okay, so now let's talk about. It's so funny when I'm going to use these words together because people just don't think of yogurt this way. But let's talk about fermenting yogurt. You never, in no either culinary circles or you don't hear people. I fermented some yogurt last week. I never heard those two words used together, but it's so true. That's really what you're doing. So
yes,
let's talk
absolutely
about,
true.
Let's talk about. Well, actually, I do want to talk about yogurt, but I want to talk about making creme fraiche as a ferment, because I think creme fraiche is a sleeper of a great thing to have in the fridge, and it seems like it's got to be pretty darn simple to make. Is that true? Am I making that up?
I have actually not ever made that. I tend to really avoid dairy in my diet. So, I mean, I included yogurt making and fermented because I knew others don't avoid dairy, but I, as in practice, don't ferment dairy. So I've never made creme fraiche.
Okay. Creme fraiche is sort of a fancy sour cream, a lighter, softer sour cream. And I like having it around because it's also, in full disclaimer, I was in the culinary world for 20 years. So I was a chef. And so creme fraiche is really great to have around because if you want to do something with a sauce and add it to a sauce, it doesn't break. It's very stable in heat when you want to thicken a sauce or add a bit of a flavor. And plus it tastes really damn good. So it's a great thing to have around. But it's very much like, I think, let's talk about making yogurt then. Because, again, I never hear the word fermenting yogurt. It just makes me chuckle every time I say it. But it's so true. I mean, that's exactly what you're doing.
So the reason for that, I can only guess, but, fermenting seems, and I hope you and I and other people out there who are doing fermentation regularly, I hope it seems like such a foreign concept or a scary word or something that's very scientific and chemical, and I think when it comes, not that I think, I know when it comes down to it, it really truly is, but you don't have to have all of this obtuse or obscure knowledge in order to successfully do it. And since yogurt is something that is in every single grocery store across the United States in 1,000 different forms, how many different types and flavors and brands and non-fat and no sugar and whatever yogurt is out there, there's so many different kinds, that putting that, something that is so ubiquitous and so familiar to us, together with a word that seems a little bit scary or odd, like fermentation, I think that is unnatural for people to put it together. But you're right, with yogurt is a fermented food. And whenever I tell people that, I ferment food quite often, I wrote this book, they'll say, I've never even heard of fermented food. I don't even know what it is. And I'll say, of course you have. You've had yogurt. Oh, yes, of course I've had yogurt. So people don't really put the two together. And they ought to, because fermentation's a cool culinary practice, and yogurt is something very accessible and that many, many people really like and have in their diets daily. So we need to work to bring those two concepts together.
Bravo. Insert applause here.
Yay.
Absolutely. So let's talk about making, a simple, straightforward yogurt for people to have a, foundational idea of, how do we make yogurt?
So yogurt, you start with the best milk that you can find. I try to get mine almost directly from the farm if I'm going to make yogurt, and you simmer it a little bit on your stove. If it is pasteurized milk, you can bring it up to 180 degrees and be very cognizant of the temperature. So it's very helpful to have a food thermometer, but bring it up to 180 degrees. And then bring it down, let either take it off the heat or turn the heat down and let the temperature lower until to 110 degrees. And once it's gotten down to 110 degrees, you can add a bacterial starter, and that can come in many forms. You can buy, little packets. They look like little sugar packets of bacterial yogurt starters from different online purveyors. They sell them very often in natural food stores or your food co-op or a grocery store. Or you can just add half a cup or a cup or so of store-bought yogurt that's been labeled, live active cultures. You can use that as your bacterial starter. You stir that into the milk that's come down to 110 degrees. Make sure that it's all incorporated, and you can go in one of many directions at this point. You must keep it at or around 110 degrees for several hours. So this is why a lot of people get yogurt makers, because they're basically just devices that are designed to stay around that temperature for an extended period of time. If you don't want to invest in a yogurt maker, there are ways that you can jury-rig your slow cooker to stay at 110 degrees, or you can put it in an oven with just the light bulb on, so the ambient temperature in the oven is around 110 degrees. And after about 9, 10, 12 hours, the bacterial starter, which could be in the form of the yogurt that you introduced into the milk, will have made your entire batch into a batch of yogurt. I myself have a very small little yogurt maker that I bought from a kitchen store for $20, and I make a couple of cups at a time. Or you can do the same with coconut milk, which is often what I do because I'm not much of a dairy person at all. But yeah, that's basically the principle behind yogurt making. And there are several different types of yogurt out there. There are different types of bacterial strains that you can start with to make yogurt that's of varying consistency. So you can make yogurt that's very thick. You can make yogurt that's very runny. Some of them have more tang than others. So yeah, there's a lot of territory you can explore when it comes to yogurt making. It's a really cool thing, and like I've mentioned, it's something that a lot of people really, really like and are already eating. So it's not a scary foreign concept like other types of ferments might be.
And do we need different kinds of strains if you're going to use different milks? Meaning, goat or buffalo or, you'll love this, yak. There seems to be a surgence of the possibility of adding yak milk as a source because people are less inclined to be allergic to yak milk.
Yeah.
Who would have thought? But do we need different kinds of strains dependent upon the source of the milk, or is milk milk?
Not in my experience, milk is milk. So not to my thinking and not to my experience. You need this kind of strain of bacteria that will only work with goat's milk, or you can use cow's milk, you can use goat milk, sheep's milk, yak milk if you can get that. So
right, find a yak. Right, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know too many people who have a backyard yak, but I'm sure somebody does.
Yeah. I'm certain. And so then talk about, I love this idea of the coconut milk from my lactose intolerant friends, the idea of a coconut milk yogurt. When you say coconut milk, do you mean canned coconut milk? Or
I do mean, yes, canned coconut milk. Oftentimes, the ones that come in those little Tetra Packs or in a carton, They have additives in them to keep them from coagulating or to keep them, consistent all the way through. So I tend not to use I just use canned coconut milk. And the process is basically the same. You're going to heat it up a little bit. You don't have to heat the coconut milk to 180 degrees. You can just heat it to about 110 degrees. Then you're going to add a bacterial starter. If someone like me is truly not good with lactose in any form, then you can use a bacterial starter that comes in, like I mentioned before, those little sugar packet things that you can get in the grocery store, where they have, if they don't have any kind of lactose in them at all, or if they do have any kind of lactose in them at all, it's like just a smattering of parts per million, so it's almost negligible. So even people who don't tolerate lactose very well can still tolerate those little sugar packet bacterial starters. You just add that and you keep it at a consistent warm temperature at 110 degrees for several hours. Very often with coconut milk, you'll need to add gelatin or some type of thickening agent like gelatin or that agar to it to give it the mouthfeel of yogurt, the familiar mouthfeel. But otherwise, you can just ferment the coconut yogurt. It will still, coconut milk, and it will still have the runny consistency to it, but you'll be getting the bacterial goodness that you want. If you want it to have that mouthfeel, you'll need to thicken it up a little bit.
And do you find that, back to regular dairy for a minute, have you found that people who are lactose intolerant might do better after they've made yogurt because some of the lactose is already consumed, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. That's very common. That's something that a lot of people report, like, ooh, when I have ice cream or I have milk of any kind, it really upsets my stomach and I have a lot of digestive distress over it. But I'm able to tolerate yogurt in small amounts. That's very, very common. Something that doesn't make a difference whether or not the milk, the dairy milk, is fermented or not, is very often milk or various dairy products can cause people to break out and cause acne, especially along the jawline. And whether or not it's fermented, that still can happen in folks. So it depends on how someone is not tolerating lactose. If it's the digestive part of them that's not tolerating it, then yes, very often those folks will be okay with yogurt. If it's the skin part of somebody that's not tolerating lactose, then maybe you just better avoid dairy altogether.
Yeah. Please refer to the opening of the show of "It Works for Me."
That's right.
That's a really important line. And so another shelf I never thought I'd see on the grocery store shelf is kefir or kefir.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What's up with that? I mean, that's another, and like, really? That many choices? And what really is, what's the difference between yogurt and kefir? Because you're really starting out with the same dairy-based product. Is it the bacteria you're adding to it, or what is kefir?
It is very similar to yogurt, and very often you'll see it on a grocery store shelf labeled as drinkable yogurt. But yes, the difference is, and you hit it right on the head, is the types of bacteria that's introduced to it. A lot of people really like yogurt because, again, a familiar product, something that we as Americans have been regularly eating for a very long time. And I think that's why a lot of times kefir is labeled as drinkable yogurt, because yogurt's a familiar thing to many of us. But the bacteria is quite different. You're only getting a very small profile of bacteria in yogurt, especially store-bought yogurt, and you're getting a much broader profile of different bacteria in kefir than you would be in yogurt. So yeah, that's the difference. You're starting with the same product, but you're introducing more bacteria to kefir than you would be to yogurt. Plus the procedure is a little bit different when you're making it. With the yogurt, you're heating it and you're keeping that warm temperature for several hours. With kefir, you're adding those little grains, and when I say grains, I don't necessarily mean like actual grains like barley or rye or wheat or anything like that. But the starter, the bacterial starter that you're going to use look like grains. They almost look like little, when you cut a cauliflower and you sort of have the little bits that are, on your cutting board after you, that's sort of what they look like. They look like little grains in that way. So they're very often called grains. That's a completely different type of colony of bacteria that you're introducing into the milk. So, yeah, it's a different product. It'll have a little bit of a different taste and a different consistency. You're getting a lot more bacteria, a lot more different types of bacteria with kefir than you are with yogurt. So, yeah, that's something, and this touches on something that I tell folks a lot, is that if you're eating one type of fermented food, that's really great, but it's to your advantage to mix it up a little bit. So if you like yogurt, try kefir. You're going to get a lot of different types of bacteria, way more than you're going to get if you just have yogurt in your diet.
And can I make coconut kefir? Coconut milk
definitely.
kefir?
Definitely, yes.
Definitely. Ooh, that's a score.
Yeah.
As I say,
you can make it with coconut water.
Really? Oh, talk about that.
Well, there's two different types of kefir. There's, the type of kefir that you start with milk, and then there's the type that you start with water. They have two different types of grains that they use. They're two different things. But yeah, if you want to make water kefir and use just, regular water that comes out of your tap or filter or whatever, that is quite easy to make. It's a lot more maintenance and upkeep than kombucha is. It's something that you have to be on top of almost every day or every couple days. And you can replace the water that, like I said, that comes out of your tap or your filter or whatever with coconut water, and you can use the exact same procedure and ferment coconut water. Make coconut water kefir.
And when you say it takes more maintenance, it's a more volatile, and I don't mean explosive, but just a more active product, or why does it take more maintenance?
It's exactly that. It's more active. It ferments a lot faster. The grains, the water kefir grains or even the milk kefir grains, you need to turn them over more quickly with fresh water or fresh milk than you do, like with the kombucha SCOBY. You can let that sit on your counter for a couple of weeks and just kind of let it sit there, and it's going to be fine. But with coconut water, with water kefir grains and with milk kefir grains, you need to be constantly refreshing them with fresh milk every couple of days. So, yeah, this is why I don't make a lot of water kefir in my house, is because I just don't want the hassle of having to tend to it every day. I like sticking with kombucha, where I just make it, put it on my kitchen counter, it's there, I can forget about it for a week or two, and it's fine.
So does your kitchen counter look like a science experiment on an ongoing basis? Or do you have
Currently,
do you have a room? Do you have a root cellar or something where you get to go do this? Or how does one fit making fermented foods into a lifestyle in the sense of spatial relationship? Like when you make krauts, it kind of smells.
Yeah. Well,
so how do you make that work?
I will tell you a little bit about my home. I live in the middle of a city in a high-rise in a very small 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom condominium. So I don't have a root cellar, I don't have a basement, I don't have a yard or a barn, which a lot of people will use a section of their outdoor space as a place to put their ferment. So I have a very small home and a very small kitchen as a result. When I was writing Fermented, my whole home was overrun with jars and experiments and different things. So that, yes, whenever I was trying a bunch of different things at once, I was overrun with jars. However, in my day-to-day life, I always have kombucha going. So I always have one jar on my counter with kombucha. And I usually have just one or two other ferments. So at the most, I usually have about 3 jars on my kitchen counter. And I try to time it so, when something is done, I'll put that in the refrigerator, and then I'll start something else. So by the time I'm done eating one thing, the other item that's on the counter will be ready to go into the refrigerator. So I try to time it like that. So it is very possible to be overrun with jars, but I try to, in the interest of space, which I have very little of in my home, I try to keep it very modest. There are certain things that I always love to have. Kombucha is one of them. I really love to have fermented shredded carrots. I like to ferment lemons, so I typically have those things and not much more than that going. But it's very easy to get overrun because fermentation, once you get going, it's very exciting and you can just let your imagination go wild. So I can understand how people with more room would have many more jars than I do.
Yes, I know somebody who lives out on the coast. Actually, she lives back east and out on the California coast part-time, half and half. And when she started getting into fermentation, she was in California, and suddenly she had crocks and jars and things because she had a lot of space.
Yeah.
And she had sort of a screened-in porch, and because it's on the coast, it's sort of a temperate zone all the time. And she had, it was a science lab. I mean, she just had stuff bubbling and things and jars with special tubes on the top and more bubbling, and I thought it was totally cool. But then she went back east, where she lives also in a very small apartment, when she's back in New York City. And she was like, oh, man, I'm going through withdrawal because I can't be making, these giant crocks of crap that I'm giving to my friends. So it's it's exciting to me to hear that it's manageable because I could see myself getting possessed.
It's quite
and
easy
really
to
getting
do.
into it. But it doesn't have to do that. That's really good to know.
Right. That's right. And that's something that I wanted to convey in Fermented in the book, that there's so many other terrific resources out there about fermentation, and they start with get yourself a bushel of cabbage and get yourself, a 5-gallon crock or something like that. And I thought that is so inaccessible to so many people out there, people who just want to try something or don't have the room or both, or don't want to have, a massive amount of sauerkraut and just want to make a small amount because they want to try various things and they don't want to get tired of something. I tried to keep the recipes in Fermented as small batch as possible because there are plenty of people out there like me and like your friend whenever she's on the East Coast who don't have a ton of room in their homes or don't want their house being taken over with jars. So, I tried to keep my focus on fermentation very modest and very small batch because not all of us have the space and the resources and the inclination or desire to really go nuts.
Well, and what I like about our conversation is that you make it very approachable. I mean, somebody could start out by really either making kombucha or even just start out by making their own yogurt or taking any one of these very approachable, I will refer back to the book. I mean, it's a very approachable, it's a wonderful gathering of ideas. I mean, yes, there's the whole first part of the book is the chemistry and the idea and the thing and the SCOBY and the stuff. And at the same time, you can just flip to a page and make something. I mean, it doesn't have to be a big 5-gallon, and that's what I love about your approach is it doesn't have to be that classic, first start out with a 5-gallon bucket. And right there, most of the people I know, their eyes are going to roll up in the back of their head. They're like, I don't want 5 gallons of something that I don't know anything about.
Right. What if I don't like this? Now I'm
process.
Stuck with 5 gallons.
Okay, so I have 5 gallons of something I really hate now.
Yes. Yeah, and I've wasted that money and I've wasted that time and I've made something that is unappetizing and
I've never chopped so much of something in my life. 5 gallons of something to chop by hand is a lot if you've not done that.
That's right.
So I want to talk about, because I see we're moving toward, I knew this would happen. I want to talk about some of my favorite things in your book. And it makes me hungry just even when I talk about it. One of them is shrubs. Can you talk about shrubs? Shrubs that, see, look, you even make the sound, shrubs.
I love shrubs.
I think they're so cool.
They are cool, and they're a forgotten thing. They were mixtures of fruit and sugar and vinegar, and you make this little syrup that is so good in drinks. I mean, and again, with just like with everything in fermentation, the sky's the limit, and your imagination is the limit, because you can take fruit that's in season, you can take vinegar that you've made or that you know where it came from, you can take a little bit of sugar and just mash all this goodness together, and you have come up with a completely foolproof yet very interesting and very, very unique and very unusual ingredient that you can use in your own kitchen. They're just wonderful. I just think they're really great, and like I keep saying, it's just foolproof. There's just nobody can screw this up.
That's the kind of recipe my friends are looking for. And how long does it take to actually make a shrub? I mean, once you have, so let's say you make your vinegar first, which I think is a very cool thing to have around, to have your own homemade vinegar. And then you get a fruit and sugar and you combine them. How long is the fermentation on that?
I usually let my shrubs sit out for a couple of weeks. I mix everything and, put everything in a jar and cover it. And with shrubs, I recommend that you put on a tight-fitting lid. Don't do my little coffee filter rubber band fix like I've described before. But cover it and just let it sit at room temperature. Shake it now and then. Shake it once or twice a day, and I just let it sit for a couple of weeks. So, yeah, I mean, it's as long as you have a couple of weeks and 5 minutes to put it together at the beginning, you have a shrub.
Wonderful. I love the idea of, I wish I'd go back in time and be making shrubs at the early part of the summer for, cocktail hour when I visit friends. Oh, look, I brought something to make drinks with.
And I do that a lot, where I'll make, several jars of different types of shrubs with whatever fruit is in season, and then I just keep them in the fridge, and when my husband and I are invited over somewhere, I'll say, I'll bring some tonic water or some seltzer of some kind, some gin and some shrubs, and I'll say, this is what I've brought, and people love it. It's very unusual. It's, requires almost zero preparation on my behalf, so it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing to do. Great for entertainment.
I love that idea. And I want to talk about, I could do this for hours. I want to also talk about the spicy carrot kvass. Is that how that's said?
Yeah, kvass.
Kvass. And tell us about that, and then I have something I'd like to suggest adding to that as a sort of a spin-off. But tell us about kvass.
Kvass is it is like a fermented vegetable juice, and there's also a couple types of it. So very often it has been made with rye grains. So it's kind of like a fermented rye beverage. However, that's one type. And another type is this vegetable-based ferment. I like to make some beverages very sweet. Like I like kombucha, and I like there to be fruit in it, and I like it to be a replacement for soda pop, and I like the fizziness. To me, kvass is like vegetable juice. I like vegetable juice quite a bit, but I have to be in the mood for a savory beverage. So that's why I like this spicy carrot kvass. It has a little bit of a bite to it. It's very different from the other fermented beverages that I typically make, like water, kefir, or kombucha, or whatever. So it's not something that, at least to my taste, that I'm drinking every single day. It's something that I really like, and I make it whenever I'm in the mood for it. So yeah, to me, kvass doesn't have to be, but it's almost like a little bit of a savory beverage.
Nice. It seems like you could also make kvass. What I was thinking is that you could make kvass. There's a really classic spring tonic, a combination of herbs which are dandelion, burdock, and yellow dock, and you could take those as roots and make them into kvass and have them for a week as a tonic, or use them as a condiment, slightly spicy, because I love spicy things. But it seems like it'd be a great thing to have around. You could use it as a tonic, not just as a, like, I want a glass of this now, but also as a condiment in foods and get, the benefits of using those roots. Because it's, and even throw in, add the carrots as well to add that slight sweet, savory edge of that combination, because all those would go together nicely.
Yeah,
and I just love the idea.
That sounds wonderful.
And then I have to say we have to move toward the close. However, I'm applauding the fermented curry ketchup.
Oh, thanks.
This made me nuts when I saw this. I just thought, oh my God, I want to carry around a jar of that for my grass-fed burger or my sweet potato fries or my, whatever. It's just such a delicious combination, and that you added garam masala to it is like blew my mind literally.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Thanks.
That's such a wonderful thing. So tell us a little bit about the fermented curry ketchup. Words you would never put together. Fermented curry ketchup. Really? Wow.
So I love curry. I love garam masala, curry. I love all those types of flavors. And one day I just thought, I'm just going to add it to things that I love. And I added it to like regular store-bought ketchup, and it tasted pretty good. And I thought, I can make my own ketchup, and this would be 10 times better. And it was. And then I thought, I can ferment this, and it would be even better. So, yeah, with any type of condiment, you can add some type of bacteria-rich something. You can add yogurt to it. You can add kraut juice to it. You can add kombucha to it, whatever. You can add whey to it, because whey is the watery byproduct of yogurt making. And you can then, therefore, ferment any condiment and make it into a probiotic-rich condiment. So, yeah, once I thought I'm going to make this curry ketchup, and then I thought I'll make my own ketchup, and then I thought I can ferment this. It was like a culmination of all these good ideas. So, yeah, make it, keep it in a little jar in your fridge. It'll keep for a little while. It's wonderful. Put it on anything. Dip fries in it.
Put it on anything. That's kind of how I felt. I can think of, I could put a smear of this on a steamed piece of halibut, and serve it on a grain, or you could use it on a burger, or you could put it on a piece of flat iron steak, or just any number of possibilities, or just dip, as you say, sweet potato fries or your regular French fries into it. It would be just like magical. It's a wonderful flavor profile.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. I'm so glad you like it too.
It's great. Well, I am shocked to find that we're out of time. I can't believe it. I know. Oh, there may have to be a part 2 when we just talk about food. And because when I was reading your book, I was thinking, oh my God, all those years I was cooking, and this, I think fermented foods are such an amazing addition to any meal. Not their health benefit, although that's very positive, but just the idea of adding it as a flavoring agent, a little bit of like, here's a little something, like a fresh kimchi or a fresh curry, kraut, or, your fermented curry ketchup. To add it as a little addition to the food to really blow the minds of your little taste buds, I just think it's a missing part of the culinary world. So I
hope it really catches on. Thank you. I hope it really catches on, and I'm doing my little part to help that along the way, and I know many others are too, so I hope it's something that
it's a really nice book. It's a really nice. I'm one of those people. Some people read novels. I read cookbooks, even though I don't cook professionally anymore. But I go through cookbooks and just read them and look at them and look at the pictures and that kind of thing. And yours is a really nice read because it has a little bit of a story. It has great visuals. It has really easy to follow, understandable recipes. So it's a really nice cookbook.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So
and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I am so delighted that we finally got together. It is great. How do people find you? Where would you like people to find your book?
My book's available anywhere books are sold, so Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, Whatever your Goodreads.com, your local small bookseller, local book purveyor. I recommend supporting those folks as well. But the big retailers have me out there too. So keep an eye out. Anywhere you find books, hopefully you'll find my book there too.
And how do people find more about you? Do you write? Do you have a blog that you write currently?
I have a little website.
I know you and your cat are quite active on Instagram.
Yes, I have an Instagram that I love. I, for some reason, totally love Instagram. Me and my husband and my little buddy Quincy make regular appearances. So yeah, my website is firstcomeshealth.com. My Instagram handle is firstcomeshealth. Of course, I have a Facebook page like everybody at First Comes Health. So yeah, I'm out there. That's my handle, First Comes Health.
She's known as First Comes Health everywhere. I suggest highly following her on Instagram. Great visuals. Wonderful.
Well, thanks.
Well, thanks, Jill. I thought this would be fun, but it was even more fun than I thought, which is always a wonderful surprise.
Likewise. I had a great time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.